I would like to discuss something in reference to nature and healing. And before I begin, I'd just like to encourage people to check out my website. If you're listening to this later on YouTube, it's up there in the corner. Just click on there and go directly to the site. Also become a subscriber so you can keep up on new shows as they come. So anyway, what do I mean by nature and healing? Well, essentially what I'm thinking is this. I was reading an article the other day that was talking about how just spending an hour in nature and the effects on how it actually decreases people's depression, people's anxiety, and basically it's a healing process being in nature. Now, I'll just start off right at the very beginning. I'm not saying that this is a cure-all for everything, obviously. But just the mere fact that another article I ran across said that just spending time in, near nature reduces obesity. And I think this is because we basically live in an unnatural society. All right? If you really think about what a natural society would be, and most of us would not really want to live in a natural society, it might be nomadic. You might live in a tent. And then as the game would decrease, you would move on. And you would check out new things and basically no permanent fixed area. Now, if you were in another society and it was agrarian, you still had a lot of time in nature because you had to go out in your fields and you had to raise crops. This is true for men and women, actually. This whole idea that, the women might stay in the house and the guys go out and do all the hunting, fishing, plowing the fields, and all this kind of stuff is bogus. Women worked in the fields. And, in some cultures, they actually participated in hunting and fishing as well. So, if you live a natural lifestyle, though, you're going to reduce calorie accumulation. Basically in these kinds of societies, you try to increase your fat content, not decrease it. And you try to really, bring in the calories. And that's why, actually, I have to say this. The reason why people get overweight nowadays, we are programmed for a natural society. And now that we live in a society where, if you get a craving for ice cream, you can go to the local supermarket and get plenty. And, any hours of the day. And our incomes are such that food is not a giant portion of our income. Now, here's the problem. Our minds still say put on the weight because we're still, we still have the same bodies we had thousands of years ago. All right? People that talk about, we're evolving and stuff. Are we really? Are we really? I mean, in some ways, I think we're probably de-evolving. And why I say that is because at least gaining more problems and not being able to survive in nature if suddenly we had to, because our bodies have become accustomed to the modern living. We, in a very natural society, if you've got weaknesses, genetic problems, you're not strong, you might not make it to reproductive age. Whereas in our society, pretty much you get born, at least in Western society, most people even have problems. They make, we have ways to fix those problems. If you have really super poor eyesight, you get glasses or, some sort of maybe even laser surgery. But the thing is that in a more traditional society, you might not be able to hunt so well if you can't see. So what we still have, though, is these bodies that they are work machines. Your arms, legs, your muscle system, they're designed to move you from one place to another, to pick things up, to fight, to do all these other things. And we don't use it. We come home, maybe from an office job where you sit 7-8 hours a day. You sit down in front of the TV for like an average in Great Britain and the United States for 5 hours a night. And that's just not natural. No one in a traditional society, unless, you live maybe in an Eskimo community in the middle of winter, you might spend a lot of time sitting, but only in the most severe cases. And so essentially, we have a system in which we keep ourselves from really reconnecting to who we are. Now, if you exercise, you are getting, you go out and you run and bike ride and do all these other things. At least in that sense, you are then building up your, or I should say you're building up your muscles, and you're wasting, if you're living in a natural society, that would be wasting. You're using the calories. And therefore, you're living a virtual natural society. Now, getting into the psychology of this whole concept, if our bodies are programmed to be in the outdoors, to survive in nature, in wilderness, and so forth, doesn't it make sense that our minds would be as well? I mean, we can't really artificially separate our minds and our body. They're connected. They work together. We often think very cerebrally, like, oh yes, technology and using our intelligence and all these kinds of things. But we're not quite at that age where we can connect to a computer and just throw our bodies away. Now, are we? Okay. I do have some scenes in my science fiction book, The Destiny of Our Past. You can look that up, The Destiny of Our Past. In it, you can actually remove a person's body and have the person's, head be attached to a computer and be able to live as, in this kind of environment in which you still are in your mind thinking you're in a real world, but in reality you're not. But the thing is that, yes, at this present time in our technology, we are still dependent on, if you want to be in nature, TV's not going to do it. Watching a nature show? No, because it's unnatural. Okay? The light is unnatural. The settings are determined by someone else. Maybe you want to look over there at the river. Well, the cameraman pans over to something going on the bank. So ultimately then, you want to get out in nature, you should go out there for the real thing. Now, unfortunately, many people feel that that's just like, okay, there's a forest, there's some trees. And we've sort of come to this, maybe with our social media, maybe with television and these other things, and everything's presented greater than life. So, instead of thinking, hey, it'd be fun to, go see some hills, we can instead, on TV, watch someone climb Mount Everest. Instead of going fishing for ourselves, we can watch a fishing show on TV. Instead of, whatever. It's greater to be a spectator. And in reality, though, if we get out and actually participate, that's much better for us. It's much better for us to go out to, I don't know, some area that just has a bunch of scrub oak or something like that, than to go to some really fancy theme park. Because the fancy theme park is designed to still keep the dopamine pumping out, just, like the same thing. You ride an exciting ride. Yes, it's fun, but it's still keeping your body in a tense fight or flight mode. Going out in nature, you can really relax. It really connects you. I know one thing about nature. I forget to eat. I know there's a lot of people, it's like, oh, let's pick a picnic, big old picnic lunch and go out in nature. I'm the opposite, actually. When I go out in nature, I just forget to eat. And it's because you get relaxed. You get this feeling maybe of euphoria. You get the, your mind is seeing so many different but natural things. And you never know what's around the corner. You never, so things take on a new significance. And maybe seeing a squirrel or a woodpecker or a badger or a raccoon or even a possum is interesting. Whereas you wouldn't maybe want to look at those at a zoo, like, oh yeah, let's go to the zoo and look at a woodpecker. But you would, in nature, think that's pretty awesome, because you know that it's a random chance that you're going to run across certain animals. Now, hopefully you won't run across a random cougar or bear, but even then, that kind of adds a little bit of excitement to it, but in a good way. It gets us to reconnect to our roots, and I would say that's even spiritual. I remember I was on an excursion with a guy, and he was from Iraq, and it was in Salt Lake City. And he looks over the mountains and goes, how could anyone be an atheist surrounded by these beautiful mountains? And it really is true. I think that if you really want to get people to feel more spiritually inclined, now, yes, I think people, it's good to go to church and stuff like that. But you gotta, maybe also go out in nature. Jesus, according to the Bible, went out for 40 days and 40 nights fasting in nature. We find that many of the prophets in the Bible, where'd they go? On a mountaintop to commune with God. So, I'm sure God can communicate with anyone anywhere. But maybe separating yourself from the society, being far, far away where no one else is at, and then being able to concentrate so much better. So I would like to really encourage people to try this and do this, become more aware. Maybe one of the reasons why we see political division in the United States between the blue and the red states, the red state people tend to be a little bit more traditional, a little bit more laid back. Hey, I don't care what your politics is, it's true. You go to a small town, people are more laid back than they are in a big city. And maybe one of the reasons they're laid back and really connect to their traditions is because they're out in nature more often. Versus if you live in a big city and don't go out and purposely connect to nature, you're going to be separated from that. And maybe the cares of the world, the stresses, the artificialness can actually cause you to think and act differently. Maybe you're less inclined to form families. Well, people that have families tend to be more conservative. And I don't think it's just that conservatives wind up, with more families. I think sometimes people can be, maybe extreme left, and then they suddenly wind up with children, and they're like, they get a different attitude on things. But ultimately, if you want to try to combat obesity, combat stress, depression, all these things, at least the normal type, not the biochemical, maybe, where maybe you're depressed because of some imbalances that you should see a doctor over, but that kind of blah that you get in modern society, you need to go out there, be in nature. It doesn't have to be the most spectacular, big giant Yosemite or Glacier Park or something like that. But just somewhere where you are away from people, where there's trees and grass. If you live out in the desert, sagebrush, it doesn't matter. But that's where you can rejuvenate, because our minds were designed for nature. And if we take it away from nature, that's unnatural. And if our bodies can wind up deteriorating if they're not put through natural processes, even substitute ones like exercise, then shouldn't our brains be the same way? Okay? Anyway, that's all I want to say at this point on that. And I encourage people to come back next week for another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions.